Wide rolling plains checkered with farmlands, spectacular mountain ranges, rocky shorelines, and frozen tundra. These natural features define the landscape of one of the largest countries in the world, second only to Russia. This expansive land is Canada. Bordered by the Pacific Ocean to the west, the Arctic Ocean to the north, the Atlantic Ocean to the east, and the United States to the south, Canada spans 2/5 of the North American continent. Topographically, Canada is shaped like a giant basin with its lowest point around the Hudson Bay, a large inland sea in the center of the country, and mountains that run along the edges of its eastern and western sides. Canada is divided into 10 provinces and 3 territories. From east to west, the provinces are Newfoundland, Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Quebec, Ontario, with Ottawa, Canada's capital, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia. The 3 territories in North Canada are the Yukon Territory, the Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. The same Rocky Mountains that run through the western United States extend into Canada to create a mountainous western terrain. Like the United States, flat grasslands, now the main farming region, cover the center of Canada. These are the interior plains. Waterways, both natural and man-made, are vital to Canada's economy. The Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence Seaway provide a passage for ships traveling from Lake Superior to the Atlantic Ocean. Much of Canada is uninhabited. About 1/3 is barren Arctic land. In this treeless area, temperatures stay below freezing most of the year. Most Canadians live in the more temperate southern part of the country. In fact, most of the population lives within 200 miles of the US border. Major cities are Quebec City, Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto, and Vancouver, all in southern Canada. Climate and terrain in large part determined where these cities developed. The climate along Canada's southern border is milder than the frozen northern region of the country. Most of the big cities developed along rivers, lakes, and oceans. French settlers arrived in Canada in the 1600s. But they handed over the land to Britain in 1763 after the French and Indian War. Canada's diverse population is 44% of British and 25% of French ancestry, with the balance consisting mostly of people from other European countries, as well as people of Asian and Native American descent. Canada is a bilingual country. Both French and English are official languages. In the north, Canada's climate is severe and the land is sparsely populated, but it's temperate and densely populated in the south. Visitors come to Canada to enjoy glacier-fed lakes and national parks. But they also come to visit the cosmopolitan cities like Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. Canada covers a lot of ground, and that ground changes vastly between provinces. Covered in snow, ice, grain, or water, Canada covers millions of miles of diverse terrain. Eastern Canada is divided into 4 relatively small provinces. Here, the winters are harsh and the waters are cold, and it helps if you like fish. These are Canada's Atlantic provinces: Newfoundland, Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick. They are also called the Maritime Provinces, a fitting name for a region where it's hard to escape the influence of the sea. Maritime refers to navigation or commerce on the sea. Fishing and shipping are major industries here. 75% of all the fish caught in Canada are from the Atlantic provinces. These provinces are bordered by the Atlantic Ocean, the Labrador Sea, and the Bay of Fundy. Vikings from Scandinavia landed on the coast of what is now Newfoundland around the year AD 1000. Today, few artifacts and buildings remain from those early Viking settlements. Hundreds of years after the Viking voyages across the Atlantic, European explorers discovered the rich natural resources here. The French were mainly interested in beaver fur, and they found plenty. They settled here and called this region Acadia. Ultimately, the British fought the French and won the lands that now comprise the Atlantic provinces. During the American Revolution, many British loyalists fled to Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and what is now called New Brunswick. Later, thousands of other Scottish and English people crossed the Atlantic Ocean to live here permanently. The British, Scottish, and Irish cultures are still the predominant influence in these provinces. In Newfoundland, approximately 95% of the population is of British origin. The types of food people eat, the sports and recreation, and even the weather are similar to those in the British Isles. When the English, Irish, and Scottish people settled in the Atlantic provinces, they found a land that felt a lot like home. It's no wonder their cultures remain strong here. Quebec is the largest province in Canada. It is bordered by Ontario and Hudson Bay to the west, Hudson Strait to the north, Newfoundland and the Gulf of St. Lawrence to the east, and the United States and New Brunswick to the south. Quebec is Canada's last great refuge of French culture. French is the official language here. In fact, Montreal is one of the largest French-speaking cities in the world. The French first staked their claim to these lands in 1534, when explorer Jacques Cartier planted a cross on the Gaspé Peninsula in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. He then sailed up the St. Lawrence River and landed in the Native American village of Stadacona, present-day Quebec City. Cartier called the region New France. The French established trading posts here that were home base to explorers, fur trappers, and Catholic missionaries. But Great Britain wanted this land too. In 1763, it defeated France in the French and Indian War and added New France to its American empire. Today, Quebec is Canada's only province dominated by French rather than British language, law, and custom. This preservation of French culture was written into law after the French and Indian War and in subsequent Canadian constitutions. The architecture of the capital, Quebec City, offers visual reminders of a French past. In Montreal, too, churches like Notre Dame are monuments to the Catholic priests and nuns who settled the city for France in 1642. French influence can be tasted in the food. Croissants and game meats are amply found in Quebec cuisine. Many foods, like sugar pie, made from maple sap, drawn from the province's forests, are a blend of Native American and French influences. Skills like cross-country skiing and sledding, vital to early explorers and fur trappers, are now popular sports. Twice a year, the people of Quebec celebrate their French heritage with festivals, like the Fête des Neiges, or Snow Festival. Come summer, the province honors John the Baptist, or Jean-Baptiste in French. He is considered the patron saint of French Canadians. Although Quebec's French identity makes the province unique, this distinction causes great political friction. Many Francophones, people whose first language is French, believe that Quebec must separate from Canada and become an independent country if their heritage is to survive. These residents continue a struggle that began almost 500 years ago to protect the French way of life.
Where can you find the world's tallest freestanding structure, the 5th largest city in North America, and some of the greatest ethnic diversity in the world? Right here in Toronto, on the shores of Lake Ontario. Toronto is the capital of Ontario, Canada's 2nd largest province, and home to the country's capital city, Ottawa. Ontario is centrally located with Quebec to the east and Manitoba to the west. Its northern and southern borders are all wet, with major bodies of water, that is. Because of its location, Toronto is ideally located for shipping goods like minerals, timber, agricultural products, and manufactured products. Toronto's access to the St. Lawrence Seaway has also helped make it an international center for trade. The St. Lawrence Seaway is a series of locks and canals that creates a shipping lane between the Great Lakes and the Atlantic Ocean. Toronto first served as a center for commerce as a fur trading post for the French in the 1600s. During this time, beaver fur was a prized commodity in Europe. Toronto grew to become Canada's largest city and its commercial and financial center. Banking, insurance, and real estate employ thousands of people. Printing and publishing and manufacturing metal products are some of the major industries that support the economy. Today, you'll find dozens of businesses in the financial district of Toronto. 3 of Canada's 6 largest banks are headquartered here, as is the Toronto Stock Exchange. Visible in the background of nearly every picture of downtown Toronto is the unmistakable CN Tower. This needle-like structure is the tallest in the world at 1,815 feet. It's a main attraction for the many tourists who visit Toronto. Tourism is another major part of Toronto's economy. Toronto is one of the most multicultural cities in the world. Since the 1960s, large numbers of Europeans and Asians have moved here, some as political refugees. Roughly 1/10 of the population is Chinese. One good way to get a sense of the diversity here is by eating. Greek, Chinese, Italian, Portuguese, or Indian restaurants and markets sell foods that appeal to the many different cultures here. Across Lake Ontario, less than 50 miles from downtown Toronto, is the rushing water of Horseshoe Falls on the Niagara River. This is the Canadian side of Niagara Falls. Toronto is a cosmopolitan city with natural wonders close by. Attracting people from around the world to visit or to stay, Toronto is the largest city in Canada and its center for business. By encouraging ethnic and cultural diversity, Toronto makes it easy for millions of people to call it home.
Spreading throughout Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta is a wide expanse of level land where grazing cows and farmlands are common sights. This is Canada's farming heartland, the Canadian Plains. Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta together are called the Prairie Provinces. Large areas of these provinces are sparsely populated. Most people reside in Calgary and Edmonton in Alberta, Winnipeg in Manitoba, and Saskatoon and Regina in Saskatchewan. Like the United States Midwest, much of this land in the southern regions of the Prairie Provinces was once a grass-covered prairie, but today it is covered in farms. Wheat, sunflower seeds, corn, oats, and barley grow here. It's the main grain-producing region responsible for feeding millions of Canadians. In fact, over 90% of all the wheat grown in Canada is from the Prairie Provinces. Because wheat is used to make bread, this area is called Canada's bread basket. This is farming on a large scale. Most of these farms are corporately owned. Only 8% of Canada's land area is good for farming. The rest of the land area is too cold or the soil is too rocky. But in the Prairie Provinces, the soil is fertile and the area receives ample rainfall. These provinces are not without challenges though, especially when it comes to the weather. In some years, unusually warm temperatures in the plains areas increase the numbers of grasshoppers, flea beetles, and cutworms that feed on the crops. These creatures can destroy entire crops if they are not controlled. Farmers depend on cold winter temperatures to kill many of the insect eggs. When the winters are not cold enough, the insect population soars. Droughts or periods of prolonged dryness can also seriously damage crops. Today, the Prairie Provinces are Canada's agricultural leaders. But they were once home to Indigenous peoples and millions of buffalo that had lived there for centuries. The buffalo were nearly killed off after Europeans started arriving in Canada in the late 1800s. Hunting buffalo became a popular sport. After railroads were built, the numbers of people hunting buffalo for sport soared. Today, their numbers have risen, and the traditions of the Indigenous peoples continue. Native Americans in Alberta dance the traditional dances, some of which celebrate the buffalo. While the Prairie Provinces are leading agricultural provinces, farmland occupies only the southern parts of the provinces. To the north are mixed forests of evergreen and deciduous trees, which shed their leaves in the winter. The natural resources of the Prairie Provinces have made them ideal for growing many crops, especially wheat. Saskatchewan alone produces 2/3 of Canada's wheat. Canadians and people around the world depend on the crops grown and livestock raised in these provinces.
At the westernmost edge of Canada, separated from the rest of the country by the Canadian Rockies, sits British Columbia. Bordered by Alberta to the east, the United States to the south, the Pacific Ocean to the west, and the Yukon and Northwest Territories to the north, British Columbia's location allowed it to quickly develop as a center for trade. Stretching inland from the rocky coastline, the landscape changes dramatically. More than half of the province is covered with forests. The abundant natural resources of British Columbia, wildlife, minerals, and timber, are what first attracted fur trappers, gold prospectors, and loggers. The creation of the Canadian Pacific Railway in 1885 transformed shipping in Canada. The city of Vancouver was westernmost, and it quickly became the leading center for industry and finance in British Columbia. It was well positioned as a port for ships sailing the Pacific. From here, goods were shipped to the rest of Canada. British Columbia is located on the Pacific Rim, which includes the countries in and along the Pacific Ocean. Most of Canada's trade with Asia and the Pacific Rim goes through Vancouver's port. British Columbia's coal fuels Japanese and South Korean steel mills. Forests, another important natural resource, cover over 50% of British Columbia. Lumber and paper products are a leading export. Warm breezes from the Pacific Ocean create a relatively mild climate in Vancouver. The water in the harbor never freezes, so ships can dock here all year long, even during the brutally cold winters that affect other parts of Canada. About a third of the total population of British Columbia lives in Vancouver. Many Asians live in Vancouver. Chinatown is a bustling part of the city, brimming with markets, restaurants, and shops. Asians account for only part of the cultural influence in Vancouver. You'll also find reminders of the indigenous people who lived here first. Totem poles are found throughout British Columbia and Canada. Carved out of trees and painted with symbols of animals or spirits, totem poles represent clans or families. British Columbia is a vital link in shipping and trade between Asia and Canada. The large Canadian city closest to Asia, Vancouver has become ethnically diverse. In many ways, British Columbia serves as not only a gateway to the Pacific, but as a meeting place between East and West. More than a third of Canada is home to less than 1% of its population. This largely frozen land consists of Nunavut, the Northwest Territories, and the Yukon. Stretching across all of Canada, the territories are bordered by the Labrador Sea to the east, the Hudson Bay, the Prairie Provinces and British Columbia to the south, and the Arctic Ocean and Baffin Bay to the north. This is a region where only the brave survive. Much of the land here is tundra. This is a treeless plain in an Arctic region where little vegetation grows. Cold and dry, it is covered in snow most of the year. parts of the soil remain frozen year-round. It's cold here, even in the summer. In the winter, the lakes and rivers freeze and become roadways for cars. Just because the lake is frozen, it doesn't mean you can't go fishing. When the waters are frozen, people drill a hole in the ice to fish for whitefish and northern pike. In Yellowknife, the capital of the Northwest Territories, the average summer temperature is around 50 degrees Fahrenheit. That's an improvement over the winter temperatures that drop down to 60 degrees below zero. In the early spring, the people of Yellowknife put on a caribou carnival to celebrate the end of the long winter. Caribou, a species of reindeer, are highly valued here. Native Americans use caribou for food, clothing, and shelter. They travel in herds and prefer the coldest regions. At the Caribou Carnival, townspeople compete in sawing, tent building, snowshoe racing, and moose calling. Yellowknife is 900 miles from Edmonton, Alberta, the nearest big city. Today, the fastest way to get here is by plane. Yellowknife first attracted settlers in the early 1900s when gold was discovered. It still has the feeling of a frontier town. Here, the sky often puts on a spectacular show, the Aurora Borealis, or Northern Lights, which seem to come straight from the realms of science fiction. These swirling bands of colorful light are thought to form when winds from the upper atmosphere mix with gases from Earth. Until 1999, Canada had only two territories, the Yukon and the Northwest Territories. The Canadian government split the Northwest Territories into two distinct territories by creating Nunavut on the eastern side. Life in northern Canada is a challenge, and it helps if you know how to quickly light a fire, build a tent, and saw wood, the key elements to surviving this cold climate.